Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to today's Fireside Chat, where we'll be talking about racism and leadership for executive women of color. We'll give you just a few moments to join in and to get comfortable. Today's Fireside Chat is going to be incredible. We have none other than Dr. Claire with us, the Executive Director of National Association of Social Workers, New York City chapter, and she is no stranger to IRAISE. She has been with us throughout the years, very vocal on these types of issues. So, Dr. Claire, thank you so much for joining today and for being with me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me back.
Absolutely. Well, we got some really, really important things to talk about. So, first things first, if you are watching this right now, whether you're watching on your lunch break or you're watching this later on, we do want to elevate this message. So, do us a favor and share this message out. You can press the share button if you're watching on Facebook. And if you're watching on LinkedIn, just repost it so your networks can see it. We do want to make sure that we continue to amplify messages that are positive to ensure that our families and our communities receive this information. So again, we thank you all so much for joining us today for this 30-minute segment. I'm going to jump into Dr. Claire's bio, and then we're going to jump into some really great questions. So stay with us until the end. Dr. Claire Green-Forde is an award winning, highly sought after mental health and racial and social justice thought leader, speaker and practitioner and advocate with an unapologetic approach grounded in health equity and an unwavering commitment to justice. She leads with passion, curiosity, and authenticity. Dr. Claire is a licensed clinical social worker whose work and interests focus on the intersection of behavioral health, racial and social disparities, criminal justice, trauma, and human development. She is a firm believer in the biopsychosocial spiritual model of wellness and is a strong advocate for for holistic and culturally humble practices that consider both a trauma and healing informed lens. Dr. Green-Forde has a portfolio of expertise which spans adolescent and adult mental health, advocacy and policy, health equity, bullying, criminal and juvenile justice, women's rights, organizational development, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in her professional capacities, Dr. Green-Forde serves as the executive director, as I mentioned earlier, for the NASW New York City chapter. And separately, Dr. Claire Green-Forde is the founder and CEO of Dr. Claire Speaks. I'm really excited about that, LLC, which is a consultancy dedicated to dismantling systemic inequities in healthcare and promoting organizational wellness. That's just incredible. I know you already, but like reading your bio makes me excited again.
Thank
So
you.
absolutely. So Dr. Claire, you've been doing incredible work over the years. I think you've been with NASW for going on, I want to say 5 years or six now.
Five, yeah.
Um, and you're the executive director. You're leading the charge. In one of the first chapters that has opened, I think, right in our under NASW has been New
It was
York
the
City.
it was the first. It was New York City's the first headquarters for NASW when all of the seven social work organizations came together. NASW New York City was the headquarters for the association.
And you're leading that. It's historical, and it's one of the, I guess, one of the really uh, the one of the most important. Not that the other branches aren't chapters of NASW, and you've been doing incredible work there. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what led you into that position and what was your career journey leading up to that.
So unapologetically, I lead with my faith, and I would say what led me was God. I was working in for New York City government at the time that I learned about this opportunity. I had been speaking on a panel about migration and the challenge of being transnational and transnational identities and the intersections that we experience. I am from Barbados. I came here as a tween. And so I've always said that I live between two worlds because I left my country as a tween and, my formative years were back home, but then I've been in America. And so I'm not American, But because I left my country, it's like, well, you don't fully fit in here either. So I live between no man's land. And we were having that conversation. And I, through that conversation, learned about this opportunity, applied. I think there was 50 or so applicants and went through multiple rounds of interviewing with, I think at one time there was 15 people in one of my interviews.
Wow.
And then, yeah, it was a lot. And then, I took the role.
That is incredible. No, I love that. And just your work and how you transitioned into this role. And I know that it's been a ride, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But I'm wondering if you can also speak to some of the unique challenges that you've faced on your journey in leadership. You started talking about it a little bit in your prior role in city government. But what were some of the unique challenges that you faced on that journey to being the executive director of NASW?
I think, like many Black women and many women who have roots in the African diaspora or the global majority in general, it's the lack of sponsorship, the lack of mentorship, the challenges of the assumptions made, right? It's the stereotypes go with us regardless of whether or not we hold them or not, right? There's the
Yeah,
stereotype that we are so exhausted with of the angry Black woman. There's a stereotype that we're all exhausted with the spicy Latina. There's all of these stereotypes that you are burdened with and are thrown upon you. I know that in many of my roles, speaking up was seen as a problem. Speaking up meant that I was challenging authority. I am a forever learner and I question everything. It drives my husband crazy because I ask a lot of questions, and I'm going to ask questions to the questions if it's not clarified. I'm going to ask for the written policies. I'm going to ask for the procedures.
yes,
And when you're operating in a lot of spaces, and I can say I've worked in a lot of nonprofits and I've worked in government, a lot of times things are not clearly articulated. They are policies or vague sometimes, or
absolutely.
practices outweigh the policy. So we've always done it this way. And then you look at the organizational policy and it's like, well, actually, this is not what the book says. But no one knows what the book says because the last time it was updated was 1985. And
Yes,
so I think that when you go through those experiences, it becomes very challenging, particularly for someone like me who is very risk averse, who likes to know the policies, the implications, and also for someone like me who is so firmly grounded in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, that when I see incongruence between the stated values of an association or organization and the way that people are treated, the way that they provide service, I'm going to ask questions and I'm going to also raise that because as a social worker and as a humanist, I always say I am an unapologetic humanist and intersectional mental health and racial and social justice practitioner, thought leader, speaker, and advocate. And because I carry a lens that honors intersectionality and because I'm unapologetically humanist, anything that impacts the human condition, anything where people are not being treated fairly, where policies are applied differently depending on who you are, who you're speaking to, I'm going to speak out about it. I tell my friends and family, I literally have visceral reactions, physical reactions to injustice. It's almost as though like I cannot hold this. I have to speak up. I have to say something because if I don't, it's like this weight inside of my chest that's heavy. And I
mhm,
know what that burden means as an immigrant, as a woman, as a Black woman, as a person with non-apparent disabilities, as a person with multiple intersecting identities. I know what it means to speak up. I have felt the weight of being ostracized or stereotyped and losing roles or opportunities because of speaking up. But I have this burden on my soul that I can't hold it and just abide with injustice or discrimination. And so those are some of the challenges, which, as we have talked many times before, are not unique to me as an individual.
absolutely.
Unfortunately, they are pervasive and deeply damaging, not only to our mental health, but our physical well being and our social functioning.
Oh, Dr. Kelly, you talked about this being a part of your soul essentially. And so I can imagine that this is your call to life. When you talked about feeling that thing physically, if you don't speak up, it's a mandate. It's something that you have to do because you were called into this. And it takes someone really called into this work to do this and to do it in an unapologetic way, because you do it when it's not popular. You do it when you might lose opportunities and people might ostracize you because you are speaking the truth. And not everyone wants to do that. People want to do, essentially, they want to go with the status quo. And
Mhm.
if it's not popular, not a lot of people are willing to stand out. And so I've always admired how you've always stood your ground, of you always stood out, regardless of whatever the repercussions would be. You've always stood firm on your belief, and I love that about you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, let's go deeper. Last week we had Dr. Ray King, who talked about the unique challenges that Black women face that are in executive positions. And in her dissertation, she actually focused on the organization, the workplace, and how
Mhm.
workplaces were essentially traumatizing for Black women,
Mm.
and especially those in executive and leadership positions. So essentially, we say things like, shatter the glass ceiling, but what happens once we get into these roles and these positions? Are we treated fairly? Are we given the same opportunity? Do we have access to the same connections? And in her research, she found that we don't, which is not a shock to us. So I'm wondering if you can actually go deeper into that and tell me what your thoughts are around that and what your experiences are around that, as well as a Black woman executive director.
Yeah, thank you so much. So first, shout out to Dr. King because she's super awesome, super dope, fangirl over here,
Yes.
amazing human being. I remember when we did the panel together a few years ago, her light,
Yes.
her spirit, just I've never forgotten her energy. And so big shout out to her. And I am so honored to be able to speak to some of her research and use my personal experiences, which to your point is it's not just unique to me because clearly the research was not just with one individual. And so,
Right.
yeah, I think the overall thing that I will say and then drill down and I can use some examples is that being a Black woman in this space is incredibly traumatic and harmful. I have certainly
Yes.
experienced a lot of physical and mental dis-ease as a result of my experiences and organizational climates. I've been asked to speak about this before, and because I do center outside of my role that we talked about through Dr. Claire Speaks, I center, anti-racist practice within healthcare and healthcare education, advancing social and racial justice, and fostering organizational wellness. I have to speak about the impact of experiences of discrimination, othering, being ostracized, stereotyped on the overall physical and mental health of
Mm.
the people who are experiencing it. Because we have more than enough research to suggest, particularly given the Surgeon General's report that came out last November, Workplace Wellness in the Workplace, specifically talking about the fact that over 80% of people talked about the fact that at least one of their mental health conditions was related to their work environment. And
Wow.
of that, over 75%, if I'm remembering correctly, spoke to the fact that directly experiencing these harms within their workplace have resulted in their dis-ease. So over
Wow.
80% of people are identifying that their workplace is at least in part contributing to their mental dis-ease.
Wow.
And we know there's the strong connection between mental health and our physical and well-being, right?
Absolutely.
The onset of autoimmune disorders or exacerbation of hypertension, diabetes, all these things
Yes.
are very strongly linked to anxiety and depression. Go with anxiety, poor sleep issues, migraines, all of these. For some women, and there's research that's been coming out, fertility issues, all of
Yep.
these things, because when we think about the
Absolutely.
allostatic load, the body's ability to handle the demand of stress being outweighed by the stress that you're experiencing, the system breaks down, the body breaks down. And in
Yes.
my experiences, I've said and shared openly, I have been in nonprofit healthcare and government my entire career. I have never worked in an organization that has valued my humanity. I have never worked in
Mhm.
an organization where I was not uh, subject to discrimination, targeting for speaking up. I have never worked in an organization where I have been safe to be myself.
Wow.
And I have been in what people assume to be the healing space, right? Because people
Mhm.
assume nonprofit and social service and healthcare to be healing, and I have experienced extreme harm.
Wow.
And when I speak to my circle of friends, my girlfriends, my Black and brown sister circle, as I call them, it's the same, whether it's been in the corporate healthcare setting, whether it's been in the nonprofit setting, whether it's been in criminal justice, whether it has been in child welfare, or literally acute outpatient mental health or hospital mental health. All of us have very similar experiences of being harmed, of having to fight and say, that's not what I said, or
Absolutely.
correct the assumption. So I have experienced a lot of that, and it's been incredibly damaging. And honestly, sometimes I've questioned, do I continue in this? Because it's not worth it. It's very low paying. You're not respected, you're not valued, and you're being abused. And so I think
Absolutely.
those are what, and I'm sure that even though I haven't read Dr. King's work, I'm sure that some of the things I'm sharing are directly correlated to the findings of her study.
Absolutely. No, and I love and appreciate your full transparency on this topic. And you're absolutely correct. And I think the research targeted about over 300 Black women executives. And so you are certainly not the only one that is accounting to the harm psychologically and physically that it has on our body or on our minds as we're in these spaces. I think about, of course, I got to always point back to slavery because that's, essentially a lot of the harm of the what we endured over generations. I think about the way Black women were treated there, and one of the things
Mhm,
that Dr. Ray said that really stuck out to me was that Black women, from the time that we walked into this country, had to work, or from the time that our foot stepped on these lands, we were mandated by the law to work. It was not an option. And what that means, white women, um, they didn't have that mandate. They
mhm,
were taken care of by their husbands. They didn't have to work. Whereas Black women were forced. We had
mhm,
no choice. You were Black, you were a woman, you had to work. And so, what that means and how workplaces have always been harmful for us. And essentially, we have had to just take it. We've had to just deal with it. And
mhm,
we haven't been seen as human. We've been stripped of humanity. And so I think it's so important that we call it for what it is, unapologetically, without, trying to make people feel comfortable, and
mhm,
just say it. I've been psychologically harmed in this place, right? In this workspace. And the dichotomy, I guess our irony of this is that we're in spaces that are supposed to be healing, like you
mhm.
said, nonprofit space, the space where social workers are in, and other helping professions. Why is this showing up there? If any place, we should be the ones leading the charge to dismantle these types of inequities.
Absolutely. But I think it goes back to the roots, right? I always say America's love affair with racism and
Mm,
ongoing denial of its relationship with racism mean that these things will continue to happen. It is
absolutely.
a such a long standing history of these oppressive systems. When we
Yeah.
think, when you mentioned slavery, the Black woman's body and
Mm,
the woman that was used to be a worker was also sexually assaulted and abused and seen
absolutely.
as just a piece of whatever.
Mm,
And that person was also, and her children were also murdered and assaulted by
mm,
the white women over who were married to the overseers or the plantation owners. And there
yeah.
were laws introduced to pretty much excuse the murder of Black children, at typically because of the hands of of white women at that time. Then we
Absolutely.
look also, the same thing
Mm,
happened to indigenous women, right? And the same
yeah.
thing happened to Hispanic women. The same thing has happened over and over again. But it's, the root is the anti-Black racism, which said, and the taxonomy and hierarchy of race, which is a social construct, right? Because we have
Absolutely.
more than enough research to suggest that, or not even to suggest, to confirm that race
Yeah.
is a social construct, that
Absolutely.
the evolution of our skin color had more to do with where people live geographically on Earth than any other differences. But
That's
we've had research in the past by doctors, by practitioners, by leaders, by politicians, by presidents who supported the dehumanizing of groups of people for centuries. So we can't go and say we've done this, or America has done this for well over 400 years. If we actually go back, it's more like 500, 600 years.
Absolutely.
And now in the last 50 years,
Yes.
so 10% of the time, we've been now talking about justice. Well,
Mm,
that's not going to happen because it's so deeply ingrained that the Black woman is the person that all of your burdens are cast on and is going to make it better for you.
that's
The
right.
Black woman is the person that goes are is and we there's research to say that clearly articulates this as well. The glass cliff, right? And the glass ceiling, right? But more specifically, the glass cliff, which speaks about the fact that typically women, and particularly Black women and women of the global majority, are brought into failing organizations, not supported, not
That's
helped,
right.
and then expected to somehow do a miracle. And when they're not able to do the miracle, because in my belief, the only person that can do miracles is Jesus, and I'm
That's
not
right.
Jesus, they're not able
That's
to do
right.
that, then that justifies that this person and this entire race isn't qualified to do it. But we don't look at the fact that we set this person up to fail from the
That's so
beginning.
good.
We don't
That's
look at
so
the
good.
fact that this person has not been mentored, does not receive sponsorship, is not able to access the same funding or
Mm,
the networks, as particularly when we
so
think
good,
of
Dr. Claire.
philanthropy and those spaces. We know that Black women are not able to get into the same spaces. When we look at venture capital, right? We know that less than 1% of these millions of dollars, numbers that I can't even write, are going to Black people. We know that of
Mm,
all the millions of dollars, 2%, if that, of Black businesses are going to receive any type of financial support.
under 1%.
And we exactly, and we also know that from all the research, and we think about the Deloitte's and the Harvard Business Review and Lean In and McKinsey reports that Black women are more likely to say that they do not receive mentorship and support in the workplace, and there's no one that advocates for them. And they're also more likely to say that they experience multiple incidences of, I don't call it microaggressions because there's nothing micro about it,
Right.
straight up aggression and dehumanization every single day. And
Mm.
then these are the same Black women that we tell raise the money, fix the problem, do everything that the board wants you to do the program, we're cutting your funding, we're cutting your staff, we're cutting all this,
Oh my
but you're still
goodness.
supposed to do miracles. Oh, and if you say that you're not well, then we question your ability to do this work. And
Mm.
it's a matter now of your character and your ability, not the fact that nothing is set up for you to succeed. And you have to constantly in that system fight for your own humanity to be recognized. And I can certainly say I've experienced that time and time again. And I know many people have. And so when we look at the broad scope, of course, anti Blackness is the core of that. But you also spoke about the helping professions. And when I mentioned it, our professions were never intended to be rooted in anti-Blackness and anti-oppressive practices. If we
Mhm.
look at the foundation of social work, and I can use that as an example,
Cool.
social work was founded by rich, well-to-do white women who had no need of money, but found this way of helping the deserving poor, that term and idea that came out
So
of the
good. That's
UK,
so good, Dr. Claire.
right? They came out of the UK and got embedded into
Right.
American practices. And it said,
Mhm.
we will determine if you are deserving of this help.
That's
But
it.
when social work was founded,
Mm-mm-mm.
those women were not going into communities that look like us. And
Absolutely not.
today, our profession is still overwhelmingly white. And
That's right.
today, people still refuse to go into those communities.
Oh my
How is
goodness.
it that 100 years later, because this profession has been founded for over 100 years, we are in the same conditions? How is it that
Mm-mm-mm.
decades later, the same zip codes in New York City today are the same zip codes that were
Mm-mm-mm.
struggling with substance abuse, lack of funding, lack of resources, poor educational attainment, poor schools, underfunding for healthcare, underfunding for social services, high crime rates? It's the same communities.
Mm-mm-mm. Dr. Claire, you gave me goosebumps. So much. I'm like, this really is so. I gotta say this, and this has been something that's been. I'm a Black woman CEO, and running, in a nonprofit organization going on 11 years. We've been when blessed enough to serve over 30,000 families and continuing to expand. But I can tell you, it is not easy when we are in this industry, this nonprofit, helping profession. You know, you start to think, you talked about that 1% of contracts going to Black businesses. Well, the same is true in nonprofit world. So I think sometimes we don't realize that that happens in the nonprofit sector. In
Mhm.
the nonprofit sector, there is a huge monopoly crisis going on where funds, large government contracts are being distributed to white-led nonprofits who
Absolutely.
don't know what our communities need, who have been around since the early 1900s, God knows doing what, because we weren't getting those services. And so it's really, it really excuse me, it perpetrates this very vicious cycle.
Mhm.
And for me, as a CEO, once again, I am consistently required to perform all these services, or my staff or my organization, for very little, for a penny. We're at we're like, well, how are we going to make this work for a penny? We got to pay all these people and then do all this stuff. And then we look at, those larger known nonprofits that have been around for God knows how long, whose board, by the way, is all white men,
Mhm.
who has the connections and has the access to major philanthropists and has access to all these resources that are able to perform, that are doing a fraction of the work that we do.
Absolutely.
And it's very disconcerting. And so when you talk about, okay, what's going on with these communities that are still impacted in terms of the statistics, why are they still performing at those levels? I'm going to tell you, I believe that a lot of what we see today is repackaged slavery. I believe
Absolutely.
a lot of the programs in the name of interventions are just repackaged slavery. Because if we looked at the numbers and we looked at the statistics and we looked at, when you're looking at where the money is moving and what organizations are receiving these funds and what they're required to do, these problems should have already been solved. We've
Yep.
pushed billions of dollars into these organizations that are white led to solve these problems, and they have not yet been solved.
Mhm.
Why? Because there's a real another issue going on that we do not talk about, and that is systemic racism that shows up in nonprofit sector. It exists more than I believe it shows up in corporate America.
I mean, it's the foundation of it, right? We're talking about the foundations. And when we talk about the systemic racism inherent in all of these spaces, whether it be social work or not, social work has a long way to go to reckon with its history of systemic racism and oppression. But this is why I'm speaking about it here, because I am a Black woman who is leading a social work organization. And despite people's comfort or not, to your point, we cannot ignore the realities of what it is. And that is seen and replicated in every system. I need to remind people that social workers were a big part of removing Indigenous children from their homes and forcing
That's
them
right.
into to
Absolutely.
Christian-based schools, and robbing people of their culture, their language, their people.
That's right.
I want to remind people that social workers were a big part of going into Black communities and Hispanic communities and checking to see whether or not men existed in those homes. Because if men were in the homes and there were shoes at the door that looked like men's shoes, they were not eligible for the support they need for basic human needs like food, and
Mm-mm.
continue to help support the breaking up of families.
Yes.
So we cannot have this one dimensional rainbows and unicorn view of social work and our profession and the helping professions. I want to remind people that mental health has been deeply rooted in racism, and terms like
Mm-mm.
schizophrenia go back to the 1800s when a Dr. Cartwright described something called dryptomania, which essentially said that slaves had mental illness because they tried to run away, and it was
Oh
probably
my
because
goodness.
their slave masters were too nice to them, and so it
Mm-mm.
justified them, and that was written into medical codes
My
and
goodness.
books until the early 1900s. And I
Mm.
want to remind people that the way that we understand schizophrenia today is still rooted in drapetomania, because until
Mm.
schizophrenia was seen as a Black disease, it was seen as a white disease deserving of treatment and care, and people were in facilities. And it was the civil rights movement where we
Mm.
see the change and the shift. in the diagnostic criteria of schizophrenia, moving away from a disease where people were looked at as docile and ignorant and in needing of help, and the angry, aggressive Black male stereotype coinciding with the rise of first generation medications, the advertisements, and then we see the over policing of mental health. And this is why today we have Black men, Black kids, Black youth. There's a reason why Black boys are 6 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than their white counterparts.
That's right.
There is a reason why Black men are more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia than white counterparts.
That's right.
Schizophrenia goes all the way back. I mean, biblically speaking, and I know not everybody watching is Christian, but if I read the Bible objectively, there's a story with King David who they say that he pretended to be insane, scratching at the walls and foaming at the mouth. Yes. So that means in the Bible, there's a context over 2,000 years ago for psychosis, because psychosis is a detachment from reality. And we know that schizophrenia is part of the psychotic disorders, right? So there's context for this.
That's right.
We have today it being criminalized. It's the reason why we take an approach to arrest, and when police sometimes go to intervene with a mental health need, that people are dead in less than 30 seconds. Because the bodies that represent mental dis-ease in this country, regardless of the history alongside it of dehumanization, mean that you continue to be target practice. And we have supported this because medicine and mental health have completely ignored the roots and the ongoing ways. When we think about maternal mortality in New York City, stats say sometimes that, yes, Black women, regardless of socioeconomic status, are 3 times more likely. Well, there's stats that came out a few years ago that New York City, it was 9 times more likely. New York City is allegedly very progressive, right?
Goodness.
And last year, the mayor said they were going to make initiatives into maternal health and perinatal and prenatal and postnatal health, all of it. But we have these statistics in 2023. And slavery ended how long ago? So when you talk about these are all the manifestations of slavery today, I 110% agree with you. It is an accurate assessment. And we, the bodies of Black women that were used as the chattel slave, as the abused body, as the body that was sexually assaulted and physically assaulted and mentally assaulted, continue to have epigenically passed down this trauma that we live over and over. This is why we are dying. This is why I firmly believe Black women have more incidences of fibroids and endometriosis and all of these, because the body keeps score. And this is such a huge tally because we're talking about centuries and the clock has not stopped yet.
Oh my goodness. That right there, the clock has not stopped yet. It's been centuries. And just, that's a Selah moment. You talked about the Bible, and Selah means to pause, think about everything that you just said. You articulated that to the T. And, what do you say behind that? What do you say behind that? The clock has not stopped ticking. We're still here. And not much, unfortunately, has changed. I did not know the mortality rate was that high with with giving birth in Black women. I don't know how it got that high and what are we doing? And I know it's no better in other states. We're seeing that same issue outside of New York as well.
And outside of the country.
Absolutely. And there is such a connection. Of course, we don't have research to support a lot of these things, but we know that they're nonetheless true. But even the connection between what's happened to our bodies and slavery, and what's happening to our bodies today, and why are we more likely to die at giving birth, and why are we more likely to have fibroids and other conditions and breast cancer. There is such a connection to what happened many years ago, what we've sustained and trauma through generations, and what we're dealing with today. And so when you bring that all to being a Black woman executive, when we talk, we're gonna talk. When you finally made it right to that role, and I think the misconception is, well, you've made it. No, no, you
Mhm.
haven't made it. Absolutely
Mm,
not. Or look, we've solved the problem. Look, there's Black women that are getting degrees. Okay, and then what happens when they get the degrees? What's going on? Our systems are still the same. There has not been much change. There's still a lot of disparities and equities going on. So, what
mhm,
much has changed? Yes, there's more education attainment, but that does not translate to fixing the problem.
mm-mm.
And I think that is the misconception is, no, we're progressive. We've solved the problem. There's
Right.
Black women that have gotten into leadership. There's Black women that have advanced degrees, but Black women are still in the same situation. And when they get their degrees and when they get into these positions, they're still susceptible to all types of psychological and physical harm.
Absolutely. And really quickly to speak to that, those stats regarding Black women and mortality for maternal mortality and Black birthing people are regardless of socioeconomic status, education, zip code. I mean, it's across the board. So it is
Mm,
easy for people to say, oh, it's because you're living in poverty. But those stats for Black women and birthing people have nothing to do with being in poverty because they are the
wow,
same across the board, regardless of access to private insurance or not private insurance, or access to a gated community or to a community that is impoverished. It's the same. So it's the idea that we could easily explain it when we know that if this is repeated across the board, then it is not those individual women. It is a system that is predicated on their death and dehumanization.
and that is absolutely accurate because I'm thinking, I don't know if it was Serena Williams that
Yes.
went through something very similar, rich, wealthy woman, Black woman, and dealt
Mhm.
with, thankfully she was able to advocate and get the care she needed so that she could be alive today.
Mhm.
But what happens to the women that don't have that type of access? And so
Absolutely.
you're absolutely correct, is regardless of socioeconomic status. And so, now we're coming to how do we, this, is there even an answer to fix this? Like, is there, with the clock that's still ticking, that has not stopped, where do we begin? And I'm wondering more so for Black women executives, because I think there is a very unique challenge that Black women executives face, being on the forefront, being on the front lines, and sort of carrying this burden and this weight of other Black women on their backs. What is the solution, or what do we begin to do, to begin to support one another more, to begin to raise more awareness, and to begin to, dismantle this really terrible system?
So I think the first thing is what we're doing right now, right? The more we talk about it, the more that people will not be able to silence, right? And I think
That's
that that's what we've seen a shift in the last few years. It's also being in community with people like you. You're an incredible Black woman. I look up to you a lot. You are a
right.
brilliant mind. You are a gifted heart. You are compassionate, and you are leading the charge and changing the trajectory of generations. Because as each child you touch, that is a child and a family that will never forget the work that you've done 50 years from now. The way that you are dismantling it by actually being in the trenches, but then also being able to bring other people because you can't shoulder it by yourself,
That's right.
right? That is how we start to shift it. But then we also raise the questions about why is less than 1% going to us? Why is
Mm,
this acceptable? And why is it that when we have finally one venture capitalist that says I'm going to support Black women businesses, that gets canceled because somebody's mad about that, when less than 1% went, but you're mad at the less than 1% that Black women are getting and saying is discriminatory, but you're not saying why 98% are going to white people,
that's
right?
right.
Until we come together, it also requires that we pool our resources, our
Yes,
time, our talent, our finances. I'm going to be honest, a lot of times we get into community, we vent, and we're just like, okay, then we don't do anything about it, right?
that's right.
No one's coming to save us. No one's
Absolutely.
coming on the white horse to rescue us. We
Absolutely
have
not.
to do it and be intentional. And boundaries. Boundaries are your friend.
Yeah.
I cannot be for all people all the time, all the things that they need me to be. I
Mhm.
struggle to do it for myself, right? There are days
That's
where
right.
I am just on it, and there are days where I'm just like, I'm not.
That's
And
right.
being able to say, I'm not okay.
Mhm.
I'm not okay today. I don't think tomorrow looks good. And maybe next week won't be either. Eventually, I will be there. But it's also
Yeah.
bringing people in community for support. But it
Mm.
has to be intentional. Stop looking for the people to mentor and sponsor you.
Mm.
Sponsor someone else, mentor them, because there's a difference between mentorship and sponsoring, right?
That's
Build community and validate. I always say the thing I will say that one of the many things I appreciate in terms of social work education and training was the concept of unconditional positive regard and the other concept of radical belief. When someone tells you their experience, believe them.
that's so good.
And so that's where I would say we need to start. But we have to start with building coalition and community with others because our Latina sisters are going through it, and our East Asian sisters are going through it, and our South
Mhm.
Asian sisters are going through it, and our Native sisters are going through it, and some of our white sisters are going through it.
Yeah.
And so we have to be able to build community and build community with boundaries because what we do, and it's not unique to Black women, it's unique to human nature.
Yeah.
There is a group of 100 people, and there's 4 people taking up the charge for 100 people, and the other 96 telling them what to do. And they're like, why can't you lift all the 96 of us up?
Right.
And these people are breaking down, and it's like, well, somebody else is going to do it. No, we are all responsible and all
That's
must be held. The concept of collective and community care is what I'm talking about, not the privilege of self-care that we talk about. I firmly do not believe in the notion of self-care because self-care is a privilege. And
that's
when
right.
I heard Patrice Cullors speak about this from Black Lives Matter movement, I was like, yes, this is what I've been saying, because privilege to care for yourself means you have the supports, the resources, the tool, the finances, the time.
That's
And it
right.
puts the onus solely on you. I, as a Black woman, cannot say to you, Shaniqua, if you're stressed out, you should just go to get a massage. That doesn't, when you walk into the massage parlor, you walk in as a Black woman. And you walk in and
That's
encounter
right.
all the stereotypes that carries,
That's
the
right.
weight that carries. You don't get to take it off.
That's
So
right.
there's no one thing that you can do as an individual where you get to say, I'm going to tap out of this. We don't get the privilege to rest. We don't get the privilege to tap out of this burden. We don't get the privilege to say, today I'm not dealing with the misogynistic, racist, homophobic, disableist. I'm just today I'm choosing not to do. We don't get that. And so we can't tell one person that they're responsible for navigating a system that is against them alone because one person might not be able to push the car, but 5 people can.
That's
And
right.
we have to work in community and stop expecting one person to lift us. That
Exactly.
African proverb that says that, we can pretty much go a long way, but reality is that we need community. You can run fast, but you can finish this race with other people, right? I know I'm generalizing the
Yeah.
quote, but to
That's a
pull
good.
out the sentiments of it instead of the
Mm.
exact quote, but it's
Mm.
we can go so much further together. But
Yes.
I want to also be clear that systemically, we have been taught not to go together, not to do it together, because from slavery until now, communion was discouraged. It's why we weren't allowed to read. It's why when too many slaves were together, they were abused. When you saw too many slaves together, they were punished. When people were getting together to try to teach each other how to read, how that was punished harshly, how one person was made the example by the whips and the public beatings or the floggings or being hung on a tree. And we still carry that. It's why we believe snitches get stitches, right? It's like if you say something, no, we have been told to be silent, and our silence is
Mm.
killing us. So the way that we combat this is to no longer accept the master's
That's right.
command that we not speak. There
That's
is power in our voice. There is power in our collective voice. And
yeah.
together we can dismantle. But together, without the support of those who benefit from the system, who are privileged in the system, we will not get far because Pharaoh's tools have to be used to tear down Pharaoh's house. And until we
Right.
have a whole bunch of people saying, we're going to tear this down with you, we're not going to get far. DEI initiatives were started around the civil rights movement. 50 plus years later, it's the same thing. Predominantly over 80% of DEI led by white individuals.
Yeah. That's so good. I love that, when you talked about that community piece and us that being discouraged, I always thought about why are we so one of the only cultures that's so divided and that are so non-supportive of one another, and it makes so much sense when we've been told or we've been punished for building community. It makes sense that we are afraid or opposed or resist it and not even realizing it's at the
Mhm,
level of the subconscious. Um,
mhm,
and until we bring that to the forefront and begin to really confront it and say, wait a minute, where does this really come from? And how do we tear it down and build community together is so important. And so,
mhm,
and then I think about the time when we have tried like Black Wall Street and how that was completely destroyed, demolished, complete demolition of what we
mhm.
were trying to build when we came together as a
Black
community.
Panther Party,
Absolutely.
right? We don't even have to go. I mean, and even now, but I think about Dr. Joy DeGruy's work, post traumatic
Yes,
slave syndrome,
I
right?
love
And when
her.
you're seeing why, the whys are there, and we've known this. That seminal work was, I think, almost 20 years ago, right?
Yes, it was.
Slaves were literally, you were not allowed to have a family. So the
No,
structure of family within the Black community is very different from even that within Latinidad, very different from that within
that's
Asian
right.
communities, because the structure, particularly when we think of here and all of those transatlantic slave stops, the
Mhm.
Black family was not allowed. Your children were sold in front of you. Your wife was raped in front of you. Your son was raped in front of you,
Oh, Jesus.
and
Yeah,
you couldn't do anything about it.
that's
And
right.
so this has, again, epigenically passed down, right? That vacant esteem that Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about, right? How we enact that. And then we live in a society that constantly gives us messages that we are just for entertainment. When people talk about Shaquille O'Neal, I'm always like, why don't y'all say that he's Dr. O'Neal? Why
That's
don't you
right.
also tell the kids that
That's right.
this man is Dr. O'Neal?
That's right.
Right? Regardless of what people say about Megan Thee Stallion, why don't you make sure to let them know that she has her college degree?
Yes.
We
Yeah.
don't. And so when you have this vacant esteem and the messages of media continue to tell you you're less than and you're not worthy and all you're good for is entertaining someone or for your body or your
Mm,
sexual pleasure of someone, that is what you embody.
that's right.
And that carries out throughout systems, whether in executive leadership, whether or not as a staff member, whether or not as a politician. We are the sum of what we carry. We are the sum of our experiences. What happens when you grow up in a soil that is poisoned consistently? The
Mhm.
fruit is poisoned, and we are the fruit of poisoned soil.
Wow.
We have to do the work, and we have to demand different soil because we are dying. And this is why I'm so big on our profession no longer questioning why we are talking about anti-racism and anti-blackness and the impacts of those factors and discrimination on executives and on students and on the communities that we serve and in healthcare and in the criminal justice system. Articles recently came out questioning why one of the schools of social work is too woke. No, social work isn't woke enough. Social work has
Absolutely.
been asleep. Social work
That's
was
right.
always supposed to help people who are marginalized. And over the years that it's progressed and changed, it became, look at our code of ethics. It's firmly rooted in anti-racism and anti-oppression, but we haven't taught that. We
That's
haven't educated about that. We have not taken that lens. And so now that social work is trying to course correct,
yes.
people are like, why? It's because we never did it that
That's
they're
right.
questioning. Social work was always supposed to be well awake. Because
That's
if you
right.
look at our mandates, our core tenets of service, of justice, of valuing and honoring the dignity of and worth of each individual, of competence, of practicing with integrity, all of these things of lifting those who are marginalized and paying special attention to people and populations who are marginalized, of speaking up and questioning our policies and organizations in empowerment theory Social
Mm,
work should have always been woke, but because we have been asleep for so long and continue to still sleep, people are questioning our value. So I would say to our group, regardless, I know that we're speaking about women executives, but as a
social
social worker, I'm
justice.
speaking not only to social workers, but executives in general. It is
Yes,
our mandate as leaders to lead the charge, to
that's
demand the charge of changing these systems of inequality. How many more children need to die before we think that they're human too?
mm,
How many more women need to be assaulted before we think they're human too? How many more trans and non binary and LGBTQ community members need to be harmed before we say they're human too? How many more Black men need to be imprisoned before we say they're human too? And how many more people need to needlessly suffer and cycle in and out of our mental health systems, not receiving the care they need, getting worse and worse before we say we are not helping too?
that's right. That's so good, Dr. Clear. And I think that is, a charge for all of us that are listening and watching this. We have a charge, and it is not something that one person can do. And our white brothers and sisters, we need you too. Our white counterparts, you are in this too. We cannot do this work without you. We will do it without you, but we can get there faster if you are working alongside us and forming coalition and partnership. But absolutely, we got to change the soil. We have to lead the charge forward, especially if we are in leadership and especially if we are social workers. We don't have enough time to talk about it, but there's
We're
so
well
much
over
you
time.
said, and I want to go back and be like, I want to hit this and hit that. But you're absolutely right. We're doing course correction now in schools of social work, and things that I have never imagined I would see. And schools of social work finally being taught. I'm seeing it in students in my agency that I'm able to work with or to meet. And I'm like, wow, when did this happen? But we're not doing, it's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do want to ensure that all the social workers that are listening to this, that you understand the charge that you also must take as a social worker in this work. That have, you've been called into this work, you're doing this work, and we are held to even a higher standard. And so it is a challenge. Leaders, social workers that are listening, that we really begin to come together as a collective to change the soil and to stop the clock from ticking. Like, let's just stop
Break the clock. Just break the clock. Just
it. Let's
smash it to the
break
ground. We
it.
don't even need a clock. Just break it.
Break it. Because it's been ticking, and you said it for hundreds. We're well over 400 years. This started back in what, 1500s, maybe even early
Mhm.
14, later 1400s. So we're talking about 600 plus years in this. The clock needs to be broken at this point. We're in a whole nother millennial generation,
Mhm.
but yet the clock is still ticking.
Absolutely.
And so there's so much work that needs to be done. You are vital. Your voice is powerful. You have something to say, and we need to ensure that we're leading the charge together. Dr. Claire, we're coming to a close, but if
Yes.
you can talk very briefly about the consultancy Dr. Claire Speaks,
Oh, yeah.
anyone's interested in booking you or learning how to bring you in and talk about these topics, how could they reach you?
Absolutely. So I'll definitely share that information with you. So I think you can post it in the chat links for
Mhm.
people. But so yeah, Dr. Clear Speaks is a advisory and speaking consultancy dedicated to dismantling systemic inequalities in healthcare and healthcare education, advancing racial and social justice, and fostering organizational wellness. I intentionally called it Dr. Claire Speaks because, as we've been speaking about, for many of my years, I was silenced because of being a Black woman, because of the weight of what speaking up meant, because of the stereotypes that were thrown on me: angry, aggressive, unapproachable, cocky, all of the things from people most of the times who've never even met me, by the way. And I can't tell you how many times in my career people were like, "You're nothing like what they said you were." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, angry, aggressive." I was like, "Yeah, add to the list that all the Black women get called these things." And so for me, it's important that I speak and lead in that way, that I can advance and change the narrative for people. And so my focus is sorry, organizational wellness and making sure that organizations are centering the wellness through a lens that is health equity focused. The reason why I work with all organizations, for profit, nonprofit, however, the reason why I focus particularly on healthcare organizations and healthcare educating institutions like the schools of social work, like the schools of medicine, like the schools of nursing, is because practitioners should be creating spaces of healing and not harm. It's because we're not educated about drapetomania and the connection with schizophrenia and mental health. It's because Black women are dying. It's because Asian women are dying. It's because Black men are dying. It's because we're not part of the clinical trials and studies. It's because we continue to be gaslit and told that it's our fault and it's some personal flaw why we have hypertension, why we have diabetes, and why we continue to navigate the spaces of workplace that are so harmful. It's because I myself have suffered and experienced so much physical and mental distress because of being the body I carrying the lens I carry and being in the body. So Dr. Claire Speaks aims to help organizations that are truly innovative and want to dismantle oppression and want to be better embed practices that are holistic, that are culturally responsive and culturally respectful and culturally curious in their policies, in their practice, and their service delivery so that healing can happen for all.
That's incredible, and I'm so excited, Dr. Clear, about your new venture. I know you're still in ASW, but also just this work and branching out. It is so necessary. Your voice is so vital and needed in these spaces, and so I'm really excited to see what your next looks like. Um, I think it's going to be incredible, especially for 2024. So, we definitely got to talk. We'll talk off this, but just quickly in the area of schools of medicine and equity, we'll definitely have to do something on that. But this has been so uplifting and eye opening. I know not just for myself, but for those that are watching. If we can get Dr. Claire's information up for people to reach out to her should they be interested in learning more about her services. Dr. Claire Speaks or booking her for any speaking engagements around these expertise topics. Again, Dr. Claire, and incredibly inspiring, such a jewel to this earth, to this to our profession. We're incredibly grateful to have you part of the social work profession and not to abandon us. Some people leave social work and they're like, want nothing to do with it. But the fact that you are really pushing us to elevate our thinking and shift our paradigms and to begin to question things that have always been, so that we can truly fight, really fight for humanity, not on paper, but in practice in real life. So that is Dr. Claire's contact information there, info at drclairespeaks.com. Please reach out to Dr. Claire, follow her work on social media, which is drclairespeaks.com. You can find her there as well. And on social media, you are under Clear Green-Forde.
Yeah, Dr. Claire Green-Forde on LinkedIn. The only social media I do right now is LinkedIn.
That's okay.
Thinking maybe I'll do TikTok or Insta, but one of the ways I protect my health and wellness is my boundaries with social media. But I certainly
Absolutely.
want to be able to help people, and keynoting and doing workshops is the primary thing I do through Dr. Claire Speaks. So thank you even for mentioning that, because we were talking about my primary role at NASW, but thank you for bringing in my life passion that's outside of that.
Absolutely. Keynotes, workshops, presentations, please reach out to Dr. Claire and also follow her on LinkedIn. I know she posted some incredible content at Dr. Claire Green-Forde on LinkedIn. Follow her content, so that you can also be informed and be able to have the right resources to support you in this work. Again, Dr. Claire, you are such a jewel. Thank you so much for
No,
being with me, for sharing your expertise, your passion, and all that you've been able to share on this platform and all that you do. Thank you.
thank you so much. And thank you for your leadership. I think you're an absolutely incredible human being. Forget just woman, just incredible human being. And I thank you for the love and the gazillion people that you are touching every single day, because you change one person, you change a family, you change a family, you change a community. And if you change a community, you change the world.
That's it.
You are incredible world changer.
Oh my
Thank you.
goodness. Thank you, Dr. Claire. That's so beautiful. You see that? We're modeling there. This is what collective care looks like. It's pouring in,
Absolutely.
it's that validation, it's that empowerment, and I receive that. Thank you so much, Dr. Claire. And we all, we appreciate all of you for tuning in. We went over today, but look, I can stop it. It was just we had to keep going. This work is important, and we're going to bring more conversations like this to you. We definitely want to hear your feedback and your thoughts. So if you did not get to comment, live, and you want to just reach out later on, reach out to us. If there are things you're curious about learning more about, or you want to hear more content around this, please also reach out and help us amplify this message and share it, out to your networks, your colleagues, because we believe that it is elevating and empowering our communities to do better. Again, we appreciate you all so much. We'll be back next week, Thursday. We wish all of you a happy holidays, and we will see you again soon. And lastly, I apologize. I think there were some quick announcements I needed to make. Our Elevate Podcast, excuse me, the name was rebranded from ATL Rise to Elevate Podcast. New episode will be released tomorrow. So please check that out. And there is an active power series happening where I am talking about the 9 dimensions of power. And this past week, we just released the power to choose, or the power of choice, which will really support you in whatever it is that you're doing in life, overcome whatever challenges that you're facing, and to really tap into the power that you have. So go ahead and go to Elevate on all major platforms and subscribe so that you'll be the first to know when new episodes are released. We have an incredible lineup for not this year, but also 2024. So go ahead and subscribe also to our YouTube channel, which also that's the video format of our podcast. So at iRace Inc., I believe is the handle. Please go ahead and subscribe on YouTube as well. And don't forget to visit us at www.iraceinc.org. And don't forget to follow me, Shaniqua E. Moore, on all social media platforms. We appreciate you all again so much. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back next week.